What's up, y'all? I apologize in advance that at any time in this video I cough because I've been trying to get over a cough for the last, week. And yeah, it's not going well, so apologies in advance. So before I begin, I just wanted to show off this adorable art that was given to me at FWA. I hope you can see it. It's so cute. Oh my gosh. I was so happy when it was given to me. It was done by Wolf Hybrid 111 or just 11. I'm sorry if I mispronounce it, but yeah, thank you again for it. It's so cute. I hope you can see it with my paws. But yeah, thank you again for it. It's just, oh, it's so adorable. So for this week's vid, I'm going to talk about something that nobody has specifically asked for to be made into a vid, but thinking on it, I realized that it's actually a really important topic to go over. It's just as important as the tips and techniques to making a suit, so I really wanted to go over it. And as you can see from the title, that is the tools and the supplies needed to create a fursuit. Disclaimer before I talk in this video. I do not know every single supply out there to use a suit. There's tons of them. They're limitless. The tools that I'm going to be talking about in this video are purely what I use to create my suits, to create all of this stuff. They're by no means the best you can get, but they're definitely workable and they've definitely served me well. So I wanted to share them in the hopes that maybe they could help somebody else out if you're scrambling to find names for supplies, or you don't know what to use, or you don't know where to start on getting supplies, or where to get them, or whatever. Also, second disclaimer before I talk about these supplies, I live in America, so if you don't and I mention a store or a brand or something that doesn't exist in your country, I apologize. I know there's definitely craft stores and stuff that exist in the UK and Australia that don't exist in America and vice versa. So I'm gonna try and be general and say your craft store, but if I start saying stuff like JoAnns and Walmart and stuff, for all you international viewers, I apologize. Okay, so let's begin. If you're watching this video in the background, I suggest putting it back to the video because most of the remainder of this video is going to be me showing you actually what these supplies are. Okay, so let's begin with the first and most basic of supplies, the thread. As you can see here, this is the thread I use for my machine, and it's the basic thread I use, in general for stuff. It's dual duty, all-purpose Coats brand thread. You can get it at basically any kind of craft store. I get mine at JoAnns. It comes in a variety of colors, and it's fairly cheap. So that's the basic thread that I like to use. The next thread you're going to see here is, if you do a lot of hand sewing, I highly suggest getting this thread. It's also made by Coats, but it is called upholstery thread. As you can see, it says extra strong. This thread probably has about twice the strength of the all-purpose thread. It will sooner cut your finger than it will cut itself apart if you're trying to pull it. So I highly suggest using it on any kind of hand sewing you have, as it will keep your product together a lot more than the more flimsy kind of all-purpose thread. However, be kind of cautious when using this thread on machines, as because it is thicker, some machines don't handle it as well, causing, knots and such in the machine. So I still suggest using the all-purpose thread for the machine. It used to only come in black and white when I started using it, but now it comes in a variety of colors, as you can see, such as reds, blues, various shades of brown and green, I believe. You can also get this at your local JoAnns, and it's a little more expensive than the dual duty all-purpose thread, but it's still worth the money. Next up, we are going into the cutting supplies. As you can see here, these are my scissors that I use. I generally don't work with anything less than about 4 pairs of scissors. As you can see, there are 5 here. That is because I use them for different things. A lot of people will say you just need 1 pair of scissors, but I don't suggest that if you're doing a variety of things, as certain things can cause damage to certain types of scissors, so it's good to have multiple varieties to make sure that they're all performing at their best. The first pair I have here is a little golden pair. This is kind of a weaker scissor, so I really only use this to cut things like thread and small things like that. Second here, I have 2 pairs of basically just, all-purpose scissors. You can find these at your craft store. You can actually find these at places like Walmart and Target, your general store. They're pretty cheap,
and I use these to cut things like foam and fabric. Sometimes they're not the sharpest, but they're generally my foam carving scissors. Be aware when you get a pair of scissors for foam, that foam will eventually dull the scissors. So you'll have to probably replace them at some point in time, but because of that, make sure they're a pair of scissors that you're willing to, you know, damage, I guess, over time. Third pair here is a spring-loaded set of fabric scissors. I will use these occasionally for foam when I can't find any other scissors, but they're mainly reserved for cutting things like fabric. I'll use them to cut the fleece and the Minke fabric and stuff like that. Do not use scissors to cut the fur. I'll go into that in a minute, but these are my main fabric scissors. And finally, my last pair here, you can see these are exclusively used for fabric. I do not let these go anywhere near foam or anything that might cause damage to them. They're very sharp and they're also very expensive. You don't need scissors like these, but I was gifted them. So I use them sparingly, but they're really sharp and they're really good. These, I believe, cost about 80 bucks at my local craft store. So again, you don't need them, but it's nice to have them if you really want some like really smooth gliding scissors. Moving on to the next part of the cutting materials. Remember how I just said don't cut your fur with scissors? This is what you cut it with, X-Acto knives. I generally work with about 2 of them at a time. That's because, again, I use them for different things. The one I have taped up here is used to cut my fur. Like I said, this is what you should be cutting fur with. The one that does not have tape is generally used to cut things like duct tape. Whenever you have something that's going to be cutting duct tape, I suggest exclusively limiting that object to cutting duct tape, as it will be able to cut duct tape for a while, but it won't be able to cut anything else. So if you tried using that blade on fur, you'd get nothing. So I highly suggest, if you're going to be using X-Acto knives, use more than one, especially if you're cutting fur. And also have something like extra blades around. These blades, even though they are sharp, will dull pretty quick. These are pretty cheap. You can get them at most craft stores, most hobby stores. I can't give you the exact price because I haven't really bought one in a while, but they're fairly cheap and affordable. Last thing I have for my cutting supplies. This is your standard electric knife. These things are actually used to carve things like turkeys, but they do wonders with carving foam. It's pretty standard, as you can see. Mine is a Hamilton Beach brand. I get them at Walmart for about 15-20 bucks. They do have a tendency to break over time. I think I can go through one in about 3-month period before it starts to break down on me and I have to buy a new one. But like I said, they're fairly cheap, so replacing them isn't a big deal. I highly suggest getting one if you cut a lot of foam, especially thicker foam, because they work wonders versus using something like an X-Acto knife or scissors. What you're seeing now is what I use on the eyes. You can see a more detailed video on materials and stuff to use for the eyes in my actual tips and techniques about eyes vid, but here I'm just going to go over what I have. As you can see, I use plastic sheet styrene is what it's called. It is Evergreen Scale Model brand. I personally get this at a hobby shop, not a craft store, a hobby store. And I only get it at a hobby store. I know you can buy this brand online, but I've never done it, and I know it can be labeled as something different online. So I would be careful if you want to buy this online, because you might not be getting this exact thing, I guess you could say. It comes in multiple colors, as you can see here. White is its main, which is generally fine for most fursuits because most characters have white sclera, but as you can also see, it comes in black. I also here have a piece of green sheet plastic. This was actually purchased from another fursuit maker. Some of them sell stuff like this, but not all of them, so you kind of have to keep your lookout for if you want something like this. It's basically the same thing, except I'm not sure what brand it is exactly. I got it off of jillcostumes.com, in which I will link it below. And last here, I talked about this also in my iVid. This is basically just more sheet plastic, except this was purchased off a different site, which I will link below. And this site sells more colors, so if you're looking for more colors than white or black or like green, I suppose, you can go here and you can buy this kind of plastic. It's a little more expensive, but it gets the job done. Moving on to the other things I use for the eyes, as I talked about in my vid once again. This is the canvas that I use for the actual pupils of the eyes. It is Doris brand. It is perforated plastic. It is 14 gauge mesh, I think you could say. Comes in about 2 sheets. I get this at my local JoAnns, my local craft store. Again, it's pretty cheap. You can actually get this online. I've bought it online before, and it's the same thing, so you can either get it locally or online. Tip about this stuff though, if you are buying it, make sure, if you can see here, that you're getting more of a matte kind of white, as I have gotten a clear kind of white before without knowing. I didn't really look, and it comes out different when you're painting it. So definitely try and get the plastic sheets that look more matte, like solid white. And the other thing I use on the eyes is acrylic paint to paint them. As you can see here, I get my paint from a local art store called Blick. I find that their personal brand works pretty well, but as long as it is acrylic paint, you shouldn't have an issue with it. Most acrylic paint comes in, you know, all colors, but if you've ever painted before and you don't see a color, you know you can just mix it. And lastly, for the eye material is clear finish gloss. Make sure to get this. It comes in basically multiple brands. You don't have to get this exact brand. I got mine once again at JoAnns for pretty cheap, but this is pretty crucial to sealing the paint on your eyes so they don't chip after you've glued them into the plastic. Moving on to the final 2 materials before I start talking about things like the fabrics. These are actually 2 of the more essential items. First up, we have the glue gun. As you can see, my glue gun is pretty loved, pretty used, judging by all the crap around it. But this is just your standard glue gun. You can get it at any craft store. I suggest getting a high temp glue gun like this one. You can get the smaller low temp ones, but I don't suggest using them for things like foam, as the heat of their glue is not very, you know, hot, therefore it's not as strong. So I highly suggest getting the high temp ones, or at least one that has a high temp option, as that's going to give you a stronger glue and it will hold your project together better. And for the glue sticks, I basically just use, you know, your standard glue sticks, once again gotten at the craft store. The glue gun and the glue sticks are generally in the same option, so you can grab them both together. And this bag that I use is pretty cheap. It's about $6. You can actually buy huge boxes full of really long glue sticks online on Amazon. I've gotten them. They're about $25 and they last you a while. I didn't have time to buy one while I was making this video, so I just went out to my craft store and bought these bags. But that's another option if you want, I guess, more bang for your buck. And the other thing, this is the one item on this list that I'm probably going to tell you to actually put the money in for it. This is a shaver. Some people call it a clipper. I don't. I call it a shaver. So that's what I'm going to be referring to it as in this video. But this is my shaver. I use an Oster Turbo A5. This was bought online. You might be able to find it at your local pet store, but I've never seen one, or rather I've never really looked. But I got mine online for about $120. This thing is like industrial. This is like used to shave dogs, and since I've bought it probably a few years back, I've never had to replace it. It's definitely made the money back for how much I've used it. The only thing I've really had to replace on it is the blades. Those can actually be bought at your local pet store like PetSmart or Petco. You can also buy them online if you can't find the exact brand in a store. Those themselves will actually cost you about $45. So yeah, it's a little more expensive, but I highly suggest getting it. I know some people who go to Walmart and they'll buy kind of like the $40 like mini set. That will probably last you a little bit, but if you really want to get into shaving, a good shaving job for your fursuit, definitely put in the money for something like this. You won't be disappointed in the end. It's going to change your world, especially if you do have one of the cheaper ones. Okay, before I talk about the fur, there's one more thing I want to talk about, and this is something I don't think a lot of makers talk about when talking about supplies. I just said the word talk a lot, I'm sorry. That is the model head. Here's a sneak peek of a project I'm working on, but that's not what I'm going to show you here. What I'm actually showing you is this guy. This model head is about 22 to 24 inches around. That is the average size for an adult head, and I've made every fursuit I've ever made mostly on this head. This guy was actually gifted to me, but I know it's a little more expensive, ranging at least $100 online. But as you can see, mine is very loved, very used, and I highly suggest getting almost this exact brand. I'll try finding a link to it online to post below, because I know there's people who buy model heads that aren't this exact guy, and they don't give you the exact measurements that an actual person's head is. So once again, I really suggest looking into buying this exact one. You're going to get pretty accurate head measurements for your heads every single time. I know I said I was going to talk about fabric, but let's move on to one more thing before that, and that is foam. So there are two types of foam to use on fursuit heads. As you can see, this is what I use. It is the regular density foam. There is another type of foam you can buy called high density, and you can tell the difference between them because regular density is white and high density is green. Honestly, the only difference between them is high density is harder to cut. So save yourself the trouble and really only get the regular density foam. They both do the same job, and the regular density is just going to be a lot easier to cut. I mainly use, as you can see here, the 2-inch pads. You can get it online in big rolls if you want to spend more money, but a 2-inch pad here will cost you about 15 bucks per pad. So especially if you have coupons, these are what I prefer to buy. Finally, we've arrived to the fabric, and that fabric is fur. As you're going to see on the screen now, I'm going to list out the names of the websites at which I buy my fur. These are all trusted suppliers that I personally use. And if you are a UK resident, Mohair Bear Supplies is going to be your local website. I've used them before, but they're not the easiest to get their product in America. They're definitely a lot easier in the UK, and their product is pretty good, so I suggest using them. I also really suggest only buying fur online. You can definitely find fur in your local craft store, but you're gonna want to be very, cautious about the type of fur that you buy at that craft store. So here's a test to tell if the fur is high quality. Look at the backing. Is it scratchy? Is it rough? That is craft fur, and that is not fur you want to use on your high quality fursuit. Is the backing soft and kind of smooth? Congratulations, that is high quality fur, and you just found yourself what makers call a rare local find. I highly suggest buying that fur in bulk if it's color you think you could use, or it's pretty, or whatever, because chances are, eventually, pretty soon, within a few months, that fur is not going to be located in your store anymore, and you're going to want to buy as much of it as you can in one go. As you can see, there's many types of fur. I mainly use long pile, but there's multiple types of short pile out there. Make sure that you shave all your fur, both long and short. Don't think because it's short pile you don't have to shave it. But anyway, yeah, this is the fur. It comes in multiple colors. It comes from multiple websites. Also, one other thing is if you follow a lot of fursuit makers on social media, a lot of times when they have extra stock or they don't have fur they need anymore, they'll do big sales and they'll post the fur they have in stock and they'll list their price and you can buy it off them. I've definitely done that before, and it's very helpful if sometimes you're looking for a fur you can't find online. So I'm just going to go over a few other types of fabric that I use. First off is fleece. Don't really like the fact that a lot of people put fleece down. Fleece is a very nifty fabric and it has a lot of uses. And of course it doesn't have its place everywhere unless you are a fleece fursuit maker, but it definitely has its uses. For instance, I use it to line the inside of my fursuit mouth, and I use it to do things like line the eyes and noses. So it comes in a variety of colors. You can get it at basically any craft store. It's on sale very often, which means it's pretty cheap. So don't turn your nose up at fleece. It's a reliable fabric and I still love it. Next fabric you're going to have is Minke. This is actually most makers go to replace the things that normally would be fleece. That is because, as you can see here, Minke is much softer than fleece. You can kind of see here it's almost like its own little mini fur, except it doesn't shed, and you do not need to shave Minke. I highly suggest only getting Minke online. I know you can get it at some local craft stores, but generally that Minke is not always the top quality you would want it at, and it also doesn't come in a million colors. So I generally reserve buying Minke at a store only if I need it immediately and I don't have time to wait for it online. But you can find this online. It's pretty cheap, I want to say. It's like between 15-20 bucks a yard, which sounds kind of expensive, but it's not that bad. Next up, we have sports lycra or spandex or whatever you want to call it. I apologize for the example I'm showing you in this video, as most of the time this stuff comes in, your solid basic colors, but I couldn't find any of mine sitting around, and so what I have here is a custom printed one that I found at my local JoAnns, which I snatched up because I thought it would look cute. It's space patterned, as you can see, galaxy patterned. This fabric is used for a multitude of things. Mainly it's used for the padding inside of digisuits, and so that's why I bought it, because I thought it would be fun padding. but it can also be used for things like noses and paw pads and stuff like that. The main defining feature of this lycra is the fact that it's stretchy. If the fabric does not stretch, it's probably not lycra. This is the kind of stuff you use for bathing suits. So when you're looking at it, think, can I make a bathing suit out of this? And if you can, that is sports lycra. So those are basically the things I used for making the head, or, you know, other parts, but those were generally head-oriented tools. So I'm going to go over a final few things that I use when making the rest of the fursuit. First is duct tape. Duct tape has so many uses. Duct tape exists outside of fursuiting. Duct tape just, you know, duct tape can do it all. You can build a house with duct tape. Duct tape is basically self-explanatory. If you don't know what duct tape is, I don't know how to explain it to you. It's basically, you know, an all-purpose tape. It's strong. I mainly use it for patterning. And just one thing about duct tape is be cautious on the brand you buy. I generally buy, as you can see here, Duct brand, I guess you could say. I've definitely had my run-ins with some cheaper brand duct tape, and while it does work, it's not ideal. So definitely spring for the more expensive stuff when you can. You can find this at basically any store ever. Next thing is what I use to line the bottom of my outdoor feet. This is called exercise mat, I believe. I get the Gold's Gym brand, I think it is. It comes in a pack of about 4, and they look kind of like puzzle pieces. As you can see, I've used half of mine here for feet, but it generally will come in big slabs, and it's about 20 bucks a pack. I get mine at Walmart, and they're very good they're very durable, you know, because they're made to hold exercise equipment, but I highly suggest getting them for if you're doing outdoor feet, and even if you're doing indoor feet, people will put them underneath the indoor feet to make sure they have that extra durability. And to finish up this long winding list of supplies is going to be your best friend, the most important item you can have, I suppose, and that is your sewing machine. I'm going to tell you this straight, there are a lot of brands out there, there are a lot of prices on them, so when it comes to getting a sewing machine, it's kind of going to be personal for you. Obviously, all different sewing machines do all different things, but when it comes to sewing machines, unfortunately, the more money you put into it, the better sewing machine you'll get, which means you're probably going to have to save up a good few dollars if you want to get a really good, reliable product. The one I use here is Viking. It is called the Emerald 118. It doesn't really have any, you know, like fancy bells and whistles, but it definitely gets the job done. I've had it for at least a year, and I've never really run into any issues with it. It's a very reliable machine, and it's also pretty silent, which I like. I'm a big fan of the Viking brand, but I've also used, as you can see here, a Singer machine before. This one was definitely cheaper than my Viking, and because of that, I've started to run into issues with it in recent months where it's squeaking and, you know, it's not sounding too good, but it's definitely giving me still a reliable product. But yeah, I've used both brands before. There's also brands like Brother out there, and of course there are machines out there that can do way more than mine can do. There's ones that can, you know, do embroidery, ones that have really special types of stitches on them. Again, it's really up to you. What I use here is definitely reliable to me. I believe this machine costs between $500 and $800, so again, the more money you put into the machine, generally the more reliable machine you get. You can get cheaper machines, but just don't get upset when they break on you faster. But yeah, that's basically what I have to say about the sewing machine. I know there's some people out there who actually do not care to use sewing machines, but let me just take this time to really insist you get one. They're not that scary once you really know how to use it, and they're not super hard to use once you really sit down and just work with them. It's a pretty straightforward piece of equipment to use, and if you've been hand sewing your whole life and you sit down with a machine, game changer, man. You're gonna be opened up to a whole new world. So yeah, that's it. That's the end of my really extensive list of supplies I use. Again, all the supplies that I have probably aren't the best you can ever get, but they serve me well, and they'll definitely start you out well. If you saw anything there you don't have, I highly suggest going and investing some of the things. They'll serve you well in the long run. Once again, I apologize if this video is long. I feel like it might be, as It took me about a half hour just to talk about everything I have. I don't know what it's going to look like when I get it into editing, but if it is a longer video, it's worth it because I really feel talking about these kinds of things are the first step in helping you create a successful fursuit. Thank you all. I hope you enjoyed. I hope you learned something, and if you didn't learn something, as always, I hope you were laughing at me and you had a good time anyways. If you saw something in this video that I didn't talk about, as I'm sure I probably forgot something, a lot of things I use on fursuits are also very case by case, so I know for a fact I probably didn't talk about every little thing that I use to make suits, but I talked about the general stuff that I use kind of across the board. But yeah, if I did not talk about a supply that you're wondering about or you've had a question about, leave a comment below and I'll try and cover it in future vids, or if it's really urgent, maybe I'll be able to respond to your comment. I don't get to answer comments a ton, but I'll do my best. As always, leave comments on what you want to see in future videos below and I'll see what I can do. That promo video is coming soon. I'm not sure if it's going to come by the end of this month as I got kind of busy, but definitely expect it in May. Sorry, definitely expected in May sometime. So yeah, thank you for watching, and until next time, bye!